Introduction. A physical experience planted a mental virus into the neural network of my mind. A simple misunderstanding that was taken the wrong way, and before I knew it, my mind collapsed. My world fell apart, and the me that I knew crumbled before my eyes. Sometime in June of 2008, we made our way into the tattoo shop that day to situate things, check messages, power up the place, prepare supplies, and make our last-minute preparations. Each of us entertained ourselves with casual chit-chat as we mentally rehearsed our designs, discussed some of the finer details, chewed on grub, and became inspired about the possibilities of our creations. Typical questions went through our minds that day about size, placement, contrast, color choices, and of course considerations about who we would be spending the day with. Tattooing is a wonderful job. Not only do we get to be creative while we work, but we also get to bond with cool clients while we become part of their lives through art. That day started like any other. I prepped my station before I went into the lobby and invited my client and their friends back as the tattoo was about to begin. I wasted no time and began working right away. About an hour into the procedure, I suddenly noticed an abnormal amount of sweat dripping down around my face and arms, and this cold, flushed, clammy feeling swept over my body. It seemed as if everything was moving in slow motion as my body began to shake uncontrollably. Stunned, I sat back in my chair. I vaguely remember my client mouthing something at me, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. Darkness crept in, and the feelings of faintness began tugging at the light of my consciousness. I desperately tried to focus and somehow was able to hold on without passing out. Besides, passing out is supposed to be my client's job. I looked around the room, saw that everyone was staring at me, and shame filled me with confusion, fear, and worry. A tattoo artist being in control had been continually programmed into my mind for almost 2 decades, yet there I sat, clearly not in control of myself. In shock, I followed my first instinct of flight as I got up and stumbled my way into the bathroom. I remember closing the door, thinking that somehow I could escape, but there was no escaping the brain, full-body, short-circuit seizure thingy I had going on. I stood there breathless, flooded with adrenaline and horrified as I looked at myself in the mirror. What was happening to me? Suddenly, more panic filled my thoughts as I realized that I had to go back out there and face those people. Eventually, I opened the bathroom door and was immediately met by their piercing eyes. Everyone staring at me was the worst part. I quickly fumbled my way back into my chair and reached for my tattoo machine. I was on autopilot. It was around that time that I looked down at myself and saw a sweaty, shaky, flustered mess. That was the moment I folded and gave up. There was no way I could continue. Absolutely humiliated, shocked, and mortified, I rescheduled, and my client left the shop with half of an outline on her arm. As the last one closed the door that day, the air seemed to leave the room. I dropped into my chair, wiped the sweat from my body, and tried to catch my breath. The immediate physical effects began to improve over the next hour, but the effects on my mind were only just beginning. I raced through my thoughts, searching for a logical reason as to why that just happened. I repeatedly walked myself through the day's events, looking for clues. Everything about that morning seemed pretty normal. I ate one of my then typical healthy breakfasts, which included a large serving of fresh cut veggies, followed by a nice run. I continued to question myself. Was I suffering from some kind of mutant virus that suddenly takes over the body, gives you convulsions, makes you sweat like crazy, and then fills your mind with hysteria? No. Like I said, shortly after my client went home, the feelings went away and I began to feel better. I was not taking any prescription drugs, and I believed myself to be in great shape. I had been exercising consistently for about 3 years, and my diet was the cleanest it had ever been. I was down from about 240 pounds to a lean, for my height, 185 pounds. I practiced martial arts 4 to 5 days a week and felt fantastic about the status of my health. I have always been confident in myself, and in general, nothing seemed to faze me. So it was common for me to drink copious amounts of coffee while tattooing, but on that day, I hadn't drunk any. I couldn't blame it on someone secretly lacing my cannabis with PCP because I hadn't even smoked that day, something I did often to fall into that creative zone. I was not high, tweaked out, sick, or out of balance in any way that I could think of, which sent another layer of fear running through my mind. If I could not think of a reason why it happened, how would I know it was coming? How could I defend myself against something I cannot see? What if it happens again? Panic lit my thoughts on fire, fearing that the mystery event would strike again tomorrow. Perhaps if I had gone to a doctor in that moment, they would have given me a logical reason as to why that just happened and soothed my mind. Who knows? Maybe they would have given me some type of prescription and life would have gone on like normal. But that was not my destiny. Okay, shake it off. Man up and dive back in. Get your ass back to work and tattoo. That's what I told myself. And somehow, I made it through not only that day, but the following week or two as well. However, the entire time was filled with crazy energy waves thrashing through my thoughts as I sat there for hours, wondering if it would suddenly happen to me again. Well, it did. It happened 4 more times over the next month, and every time it happened, I was tattooing, which made me think that somehow it had something to do with tattooing. To top it off, the last time it happened, it felt like I caused it with my thoughts alone. That was the moment I accidentally opened the Pandora's box of my mind and began losing my sanity. I snapped, walked into the lobby, told my receptionist that I was quitting tattooing, and instructed her to cancel all my future appointments. Then, without saying a word to anyone around me, I rushed out of my shop, got into my car, and floored it. I flew into traffic and punched the dashboard repeatedly, screaming madness at the top of my lungs. I raced through my city's streets, out into the country, swerving and thrashing with aggression as I went. At some point, I pulled over, jumped out, and slammed the door as violently as possible. I kicked in the fender so hard that I twisted my ankle. I turned my back to the car and then began raging as I sprinted through some field at full speed until I tripped, slamming into the dirt and gravel. I rolled around yelling and crying as I tugged at my body, screaming with anger and resentment. Why, God? Why is this happening to me? I remember laying there pitifully curled up in a ball for what seemed like forever. Eventually my struggling stopped. I became quiet, and the volume of silence gradually filled the air. I slowly watched the sky turn into dark clouds over me. Time seemed to stop moving, and my mind went numb as tiny drops of water gently landed on my face and arms. Suddenly, I had a brilliant idea. I do not have to figure this out. I could just stay here for the rest of my life. But I would need some blankets and water. And yeah, that's not going to work. Moments later, steady rain pushed me back into my car for shelter, where I found my phone ringing off the hook. In another fit of anger, I snatched it up and continually smashed it against the steering wheel until finally it went silent. The rush of emotions began to fade again. I sat back in my car seat and shuddered as my cold, wet body wept. Feelings of hopelessness and despair filled me with deep sadness. The sound of raindrops pelting off my car turned into white noise as I faded away in worry-filled thoughts, desperately trying to make sense of what was happening to me. As the weeks began to pass, anxiety and depression began invading my thoughts and systematically rewriting the matrix of my mind. I went from having those 4 episodes at work to experiencing shortness of breath, feelings of faintness, sweating, nausea, insomnia, irritability, trembling, panic, and hysteria, followed by countless hours of depression day in and day out for years afterwards. I would lay awake in bed trying to fall asleep at night, with my heart pounding and legs and body aching, as I tossed and turned, listening to the chaos of voices that ripped through my thoughts. At some point, I did fall asleep, only to be jolted awake hours later, forced to lay there while I caught my breath. Sweaty palms, pit in my stomach, and racing thoughts plagued me daily as I mentally went over negative scenarios about what could be wrong with my health and well-being. I didn't have insurance, so going to the doctors only to have them tell me that they couldn't find anything wrong with me only added to my stress levels. I sat there alone in my thoughts for hours trying to calculate some kind of promising future. But every path I mentally explored fell short by a long shot. Then I started having mild chest pains. Was it my heart? I was constantly stressed and made up stories in my mind about what could be wrong with me. Would I suddenly have a heart attack or a stroke and fall over and die? The overall tension in my thoughts steadily increased, and the foundation of my mind began dissolving as symptoms in my body made me think fearful thoughts. And those fearful thoughts caused more symptoms in my body. One amplified and fueled the other, and before I knew it, I was living a walking nightmare in a constant state of fear and mental decay. As I continually ran up behind myself and my thoughts and yelled, "Boo!" Round and round I chased myself through my mind, twitching and flinching in fear about what I would tell myself next. One day I noticed that my fists were constantly balled up and my jaws always seemed clenched. How long had this been going on? I would have to constantly remind myself to relax. My heart rate was always racing, and that set the environment of fear running through my mind at all times. Imagine the fear button of your body being stuck in the on position. That's how it felt. It was like an army of negative thinking patterns formed on the horizon of my thoughts, all demanding my attention as they marched forward, stabbing, slashing, and shredding my brain cells on the way by. In those days, my thoughts felt hot, like that melting air on a long desert highway. Every thought that went through my mind was heating and blistering my brain, giving it an almost acidic-like quality. I couldn't stop the negative ideas from forming in my mind. Do I have a neurological disorder or some type of brain cancer? Is it my thyroid or adrenal gland? Sometimes my heart would pound so hard that I would sit there for hours believing at any moment I was going to have a heart attack, seizure, aneurysm, or some type of organ failure and suddenly fall over and die. Why was I thinking about death all the time? And why couldn't I stop myself? Going to bed became one of the worst parts of my day. Lying down with nothing to distract my mind was torture. In the silence between the sheets was one of my most vulnerable places to be. If I could move around and distract myself, I was somehow able to function. But being alone at bedtime with my thoughts was like being locked inside of a cage with raging lunatics that whispered madness into my ears as they laughed hysterically. I dreaded the thought of going to bed every night. Every day against my will, my subconscious mind would replay the events of the last couple years, and I would relive them in vivid clarity all over again. It was like hell's version of Groundhog's Day. It felt like the details were burned into my brain cells and hardwired to the first step of each thought that went through my mind. Putting on my shoes, brushing my teeth, grocery shopping, or walking the dog was clouded by a frenzy of negative thinking patterns darting back and forth behind my eyes. About a year into the chaos, I finally spoke with the right doctor, and he was able to make sense of what happened to me. I was having blood sugar imbalances when this all began. Back then, my diet consisted mostly of raw vegetables, supplementing plant-based protein shakes, sprinkled with some fruit. I was exercising like a madman and not eating enough carbohydrates or fats. A couple of hours of vigorous MMA sparring the night before, followed by a run that morning, and it made perfect sense. My body was out of energy. Then I began tattooing and put my brain to work. My blood was depleted of glucose energy, so my body shut down, plain and simple. It all started from a blood sugar imbalance, but since I had never experienced one, I was unfamiliar with how they felt. There was never anything wrong with me, but by the time I had figured that out, it was too late. I had already taught myself how to generate those symptoms and many more using my thoughts alone. Is this my life now? How in the hell did I get to this place? One day I was on top of the world with my bills paid, schedule full, and vacation planned. And the next, I was ripping myself apart on the inside, absolutely slaughtering myself with negative thoughts, fears, and depression, telling myself horrible things and truly believing them all like a helpless little idiot. It felt like my mind was possessed by demons that were feeding on my fear as they picked parts of my brain off and ate them. As I type these words right now, it's hard for me to imagine that I used to feel that way, but I did, and far worse than I could ever describe in words. But that's not what this book is about, though I will be sharing more of the details in the following pages. This book is about reprogramming the mind and healing from negative thinking patterns from the mild to the severe. You see, I did not realize it at the time, but I was unwittingly programming my subconscious mind to think negative thoughts. Those first few blood sugar imbalances activated fearful thoughts, and as I repeatedly went over the details in my mind, my subconscious was watching, analyzing, studying, and recording me. It did not take long to program those negative belief systems directly into my subconscious, and then it began filling my thoughts with those ideas. The more I thought about it, the more my subconscious mind would remind me to think about it. And like a dog chasing its tail, the momentum of the story grew, and the mental pathogen that I accidentally created began taking over my mind. What you will find in this book. During those dark nights of my soul, my mind fractured, my thoughts splintered, and everything I knew as reality began to short circuit and break apart. From a do-or-die perspective, I slowly pieced my mind back together and carefully documented the steps to myself in detail, grasping onto each step as I memorized the process to make absolutely certain that my understanding made sense, in fear that my sanity would slip away again if I made any mistakes. As the long years of recovery passed, not in this book, meditation, diet, and exercise were the only things I could do for moments of relief, until one day I did something by chance. At first, I didn't put that much thought into what I was doing, but I did notice a positive, distinct flash of energy go through me when I did it. Everything about the process felt right, so I did it again and again. Though the process was easy to do and I could do it by myself, it seemed to have great significance. Little did I know at the time, I was directly tapping into my subconscious mind and rewiring my thoughts. The more I did it, the better I felt, and for the first time in years, I began to feel good again. Hope filled me with joy, and from the ashes of my mind, a new story began to unfold. I kept practicing, and through time, developed a unique way of explaining how subconscious programming works. Explaining it creatively, in a way that not only made sense to myself, but others. The technique I was using to help myself began to take on new meaning, shape, and form. The more closely I analyzed it and described it to my friends, the more confident I became that my explanation of this technique and why someone would want to do it could change people's lives. I believe the words of this book can help people accelerate their positive belief systems, help them stay focused on their dreams, and achieve their goals. Most importantly, it may help people heal from the excessive negative thinking, including more extreme mental conditions like anxiety, PTSD, depression, or bipolar disorder. It may also even possibly result in healing or saving lives without the use of dangerous drugs. In the pages that follow, I will share a useful description of the way your subconscious mind works, plus a technique that can be used for deep, meaningful recoding of the mind. A technique some people have heard of, but explained in a new way. I believe that this explanation will make you positively curious and possibly excited about trying it, giving it more implications and new meaning as to how it can be applied to your life. After reading this, you may wonder, as I have, why some form of this isn't taught to children, at an early age to help them control and guide their thought processes, giving them more confidence and decreasing their chances of becoming depressed or developing mental issues while simultaneously programming their minds for success and happiness. This book is in two halves. The first can be applied to your life with little to no effort. A creative description of the way your mind works. A visualization that can be slid over the matrix of your mind, clicking layers and layers of thought-provoking ideas together. An artist's perspective of how it is programmed, and exactly why you should think it's one of the most important things that you will ever do in your life. The second half of this book is about the technique itself, called expressions. Should you decide to try it, effort will be required. Performing the technique on yourself requires you to lift fingers a little. It is recommended that you do not skip ahead. The first half of this book is short on purpose. Each part leads quickly into the next, painting a picture of the programmer's chair of your mind and turning you into a mental ninja. I will paint this picture by discussing useful points that I believe will resonate well with you and only require your self-reflection to validate and verify. The words of this book are purely formulated to inspire your mind, help you become more aware of the subtle thoughts that influence your decisions, and reveal powerful ways to change the ones you do not like. Using common words, my intention is to explain this in an uncomplicated way, like two friends having a meaningful conversation with each other. Many people beat themselves up on the inside and are not aware of why they are doing it. After completing some of the exercises in this book, you may be surprised to discover just how poorly you talk to yourself. You may also be surprised to discover just how easy it is to see yourself with new eyes and immediately begin changing from within.